Would you buy products from a company that collaborated with the Nazis during World War II? If you've ever had a headache or needed relief from pain, you may have taken an aspirin.
The aspirin, Miralax, Claritin, Alka-Seltzer, Midol, or Aleve, you've been a customer of Bayer.
Bayer, the company that makes the pain reliever, may have one of the darkest histories when it comes to collaborating with the Nazi Party. In the 1930s, Bayer was part of a company called IG Farben.
IG Farben was a colossal German chemical and pharmaceutical conglomerate at the start of World War II, the largest corporation in all of Europe and the fourth largest in the world. Backed by the German behemoth IG Farben since 1929, Standard Oil of New Jersey manufactured and supplied the Luftwaffe with tetrathyl lead, an essential component in aviation fuel, and with the help of IG Farben, even sourced tetrathyl lead from the British Standard Oil subsidiary Ethel. Standard Oil New Jersey also shipped Allied fuel to the Nazis occupying France through Switzerland and conspired with them to prevent the development of synthetic rubber in America, resulting in the US military being desperately short of rubber when it leapt into war. Standard Oil of New Jersey went on to become Exxon, which merged with Mobil in 1999 and became ExxonMobil. As well as synthetic rubber, IG Farben manufactured methanol and much of Germany's plastics, explosives, nitrogen and solvents, pharmaceuticals, and synthetic fuel.
It was a conglomerate made up of several chemical companies in Germany. As the Nazis swept through Czechoslovakia, IG Farben worked closely with the party to capture chemical factories to be used by the corporation. The chemists who worked for Bayer and were employed by IG Farben later went on to create Zyklon B.
They produced the gas Zyklon B, which was used in the gas chambers.
The gas used in concentration camps to quickly kill large numbers of Jews and other people the Nazis labeled as undesirable.
This massive conglomerate was responsible for countless atrocities in World War II and actually paid to be able to test their drugs on prisoners in concentration camps.
One of IG Farben's subsidiaries even supplied Zyklon B, the cyanide-based pesticide gas used to exterminate the Jews in gas chambers.
IG Farben also heavily used slave labor from the same camps they provided Zyklon B to. It was a very messed up relationship between the Nazis and IG Farben.
A constituent of IG Farben, Bayer, which is still going strong today, conducted medical experiments on prisoners at Auschwitz, injecting them with a range of diseases including typhoid, tuberculosis, and diphtheria, and then testing drugs on them like pigs or monkeys, often killing them in the process.
They built a factory next to Auschwitz where they would use the prisoners their product would later kill for slave labor.
IG Farben constructed a synthetic rubber plant as part of the Auschwitz concentration camp complex in Poland, employing slave labor from the camps of Auschwitz, among other sources.
As the war came to an end, IG Farben was forced to dissolve. The directors of the company were put on trial for war crimes.
IG Farben began to dissolve at the end of the war, with its directors being put on trial for war crimes, though many of these directors were acquitted and those sentenced to prison got out way too early.
Unfortunately, justice was never served, and Fritz Tamir, who was the director of operations at the IG Farben facility at Auschwitz, became the president of Bayer after the war.
Bayer apologized in 1995 and set up a compensation fund for former captive laborers, though IG Farben took until 2012 to finish its dissolution.
In 1995, Bayer apologized for their role in the Holocaust.
Charles Higham inferred in his book, Trading with the Enemy, an expose of the Nazi-American money plot 1933 to 1949. Higham suggests that companies like IG Farben, Ford Motors, General Motors, Standard Oil, Chase Manhattan Bank, BIS, ITT, and many other supposedly Nazi and fascism sympathizing profiteers are all part of some Illuminati-level fraternity. I won't be diving into that quicksand in this video, however. It's naturally rather complicated and controversial, as are each of the cases I mentioned, even in isolation. Although I do warn you, you can dig pretty hard and still get nowhere. Many of these companies are still trading, many under the same name, and it's understandable why they would want to keep their history buried.
On their own website, Bayer admits that they merged with IG Farben Industry AG in the 1920s, before IG Farben was dissolved at the end of World War II. And what they did during that time is, well, a little dark and complex. According to the Holocaust Encyclopedia, as part of the IG Farben conglomerate, which strongly supported the Third Reich, the Bayer company was complicit in the crimes of the Third Reich. In its most criminal activities, the company took advantage of the absence of legal and ethical constraints on medical experimentation to test its drugs on unwilling human subjects. These included paying a retainer to SS physician Helmuth Vetter to test Rudenol and other sulfonamide drugs on deliberately infected patients at Dachau, Auschwitz, and Gusen concentration camps. Vetter was later convicted by an American military tribunal at the Mauthausen trial in 1947 and was executed at Landsberg prison in February 1949. In Buchenwald, physicians infected prisoners with typhus in order to test the efficacy of anti-typhus drugs, resulting in high mortality among test prisoners. Baer was particularly active in Auschwitz. A senior Baer official oversaw the chemical factory in Auschwitz III, Monowitz. Most of the experiments were conducted in Birkenau in Block 20, the women's camp hospital. There, Vetter and Auschwitz physicians Edward Wirths and Friedrich Entress tested Baer pharmaceuticals on prisoners who suffered from and often had been deliberately infected with tuberculosis, diphtheria, and other diseases. I know that for many people, this does fall into a strange, gray, historical area. Like, does this mean you're a horrible person now for driving a Volkswagen because they were once under Hitler's control? Or that maybe you feel guilty wearing Chanel because Coco Chanel was a Nazi sympathizer? Well, not necessarily. But I think holding companies responsible is still important. And with Bayer, well, it's the experimenting that really gets to me. Being controlled by them was bad enough, but actively testing drugs on those in the camps is a bit beyond words, but probably the norm, unfortunately, for that time. Not to mention that Baer didn't take responsibility for its actions. Fritz Termeer, convicted of war crimes for his actions at Auschwitz, was elected to Baer's AG Supervisory Board in 1956 and stayed on until 1964. War crimes, horrific actions at one of the most known despicable concentration camps. How the fuck can Baer simply overlook this? It's not as if he's had a little misdemeanor on his record. This was a horrible man. And yet, Baer honors him as if it meant nothing. CBG Network put an article online from David Rosenberg, which stated that not only was he on the board of directors until the 60s, but as recently as 2006, Baer still placed a wreath on this man's grave. Even if their current employees had no part in these dark deeds, as Baer puts it, that's not what matters here. If Baer wants us to believe that they would like to be distanced from their horrific past, then stop honoring his gravesite. Stop issuing scholarship funds in his name. If my company was associated with concentration camps, which caused countless pain for many, then you better believe that's the least I would do to show people I had changed. And this evil man, Fritz, was involved in the planning of Monowitz concentration camp, a satellite camp of KC Auschwitz, which was responsible for helping build the IG Farben Bühne work factory at Auschwitz, which conducted human experiments and held some 25,000 forced laborers under deplorable conditions. And it was Baer, together with two other chemical giants, BASF and Hoechst, which developed the terrible chlorine gas used in World War I. In 1925, the three formed a giant cartel, IG Farben, which became the world's leader in pharmaceuticals, dyes, and chemicals. During the early 1930s, IG Farben became the single largest donor to the election campaign of Adolf Hitler. Although it was slightly reluctant at first because some of its key scientists were Jewish, in the decisive year before Hitler won power, IG Farben donated 400,000 marks to him and to his Nazi party. This was amply rewarded. IG Farben, with Baer, became the single largest profiteer of German conquests in World War II. So the fact that they're not completely distancing themselves from their Nazi past is a bit gross when you consider what a large role it is that they played in it, and even I didn't fully understand how encompassing they were in those camps. The testing, the human experiments, the gas, donating to Hitler's campaign, for fuck's sake, can it get any worse? Well, obviously it can. People's World article I found on the topic states, those wartime IG Farben men are all dead, but their companies flourish. And Bayer has been accused in recent years of unethical medical experiments, selling drugs shown to be risky, hindering developing countries from developing vital medications, and using imported materials produced by child labor. Having a horrific past is one thing, but not truly addressing it, leaving wreaths on the graves of those responsible for war crimes and thousands of deaths, is something else entirely. It shows a level of gross negligence and lack of accountability that's quite frankly rage-inducing, but there is plenty more, unfortunately.
During World War II, a company called IG Farben was in charge of making the deadly chemicals used in Nazi concentration camps. As a reward for their help, the IG Farben was allowed to conduct experiments on Jewish prisoners and test out their chemicals and their medications on these people. And once the war ended and the executives from IG Farben were charged with war crimes, they went and formed a new company called Bayer, a company that we're all familiar with today. But even though you know their name, it's unlikely that you know who Bayer really is. I'm joined by Farron Cousins from the Trial Lawyer magazine to tell us a little bit about this story. And you know, of course, you know my involvement with Bayer. I think every major case that Bayer has faced is a case that I have brought in some form or fashion, all the way back, of course, to the HIV contamination case, which is, I mean, horrendous. Right. The facts, you know the facts. I mean, you've written about the facts. Talk about it a little bit.
Well, on that particular case, it was, you know, Bayer Pharmaceuticals, late 70s, early 80s. They came out with this new Factor 8, it was called. They were gathering platelets from healthy individuals, using it to create this Factor 8 to give to hemophiliacs, you know, because their blood wouldn't clot. So they gave them this. It was supposed to help their blood clot. But what had actually happened, they weren't taking platelets and blood from healthy individuals. They were going to prison populations. They were going to areas where they knew that people had diseases, hepatitis, and more importantly, HIV.
Yeah, they were going where there's a lot of poverty, inner city poverty, where people were trying to make money simply by selling their plasma. Yeah, I handled this case, as you probably know. What's so startling about it, once it was very evident that the blood supply that they were using to make to come up with this drug for hemophiliacs, once they knew that, they took it off the market in America and then they sold it all over the world. In other words, the same stuff that they knew had this HIV virus in it, they sold in Asia, sold in South America. The ugly part of it, of course, is nobody was prosecuted. But, you know, in that deposition, I've taken so many depositions. I thought one deposition I think is relevant. Maybe we can look at it today. But it is a deposition where I'm talking about the war crimes of Bayer, how they were involved with Zyklon, with gas at Zyklon B gas at Auschwitz, how the company actually paid for experiments that were done by Mengele, you know, who of course we know his history. He was in Auschwitz and he performed a whole battery of tests on people of every imaginable kind. He injected chemicals of every kind that were experimental chemicals that they were trying to find out, would it kill people, would it make them better? He was called the angel of death. That tells you how bad the man was. But I want to play a clip from a deposition I took of a Bayer executive, Leslie North. I asked her what she knew about the company's history, and here's how she reacted when she learned the truth. I really think she knew this and was trying to lie about it and cover up the fact that she didn't know about it. Let's take a look. Feel that you know enough about Bayer history as a company, for example, to be proud of the leadership of that company. You proud of that?
Yes.
Why are you so proud?
Because I believe that the individuals who have led Bayer have been smart, authentic individuals who have demonstrated success over time.
The leaders have been what now? Smart, and what else?
Can somebody read that back, please?
Let me have 232. Now, do you recognize this man, Fritz Termeer, as being one of those smart, authentic leaders of Bayer? You recognize? First of all, do you even know who Fritz Termeer is?
I'd like to read this document.
Yeah. I'd like you to read it too. Now, when you read this document, did you read the part about Fritz Tamir being a Nazi war criminal? Would you underline? Would you underline those words, Nazi war criminal, please? Or highlight it for me. Fritz Tamir, let's read this. Fritz Tamir, July 4th, 1884, October 27th through 1967. They got, see that mug shot over there on the right? See that?
Are you asking if I see the picture?
Yeah, you see that picture?
I see this picture.
Does that look like a family picture or a mug shot to you?
I have no idea what it might be.
All right. Well, he says he was a German chemist and a Nazi war criminal. Now, when you were telling me about leaders of Bayer being authentic and smart, did you know about Fritz Tamir?
I've never heard this name before.
And so, did you know, ma'am, that Fritz Tamir, after he was released from prison for being a Nazi war criminal there at Auschwitz, that he became a supervisory board chairman of Bayer? Did you know that? Would you go up on this? So I don't think she's ever seen this before. So if you would, Corey, you see, there you go. Look, Corey, right here. There you go. It says Fritz Tamir also worked for Bayer and later IG Farben. He was involved in the planning of Monowitz concentration camp, a satellite camp of KZ Auschwitz. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison by the Nuremberg trials in 1948. After he was released in 1951, he became a supervisory board chairman of Bayer AG, and he retired in 1961. Now, the first time you've ever heard that is today?
Yes.
And when you were telling me that your knowledge, what I'm trying to figure out is what is your real knowledge of the history of this company, you understand? And your knowledge is that the leaders for this company have been, for Bayer, have been smart and they've been authentic. That's what you told me just a minute ago, right?
Yes.
So, you know, as you look at that, you start understanding that this corporation that now the Supreme Court says we have to treat this corporation like a person. Well, this is a psychopath. This is a murdering psychopath who now, by the way, we understand has joined forces with Monsanto, another national psychopath. What's your take?
Well, what's really interesting about the Bayer story here, and this is what Ms. North in that deposition was saying she didn't know about, maybe she did, maybe she didn't. It's unlikely you couldn't know about this working for the company. Yeah. But Fritz Tamir, the man you mentioned in that, you know, one of the main founders of Bayer, was also one of the worst and actually received the longest prison sentence of all of the IG Farben executives. Now, not a very long prison sentence. I think it was under 10 years, actually. And then he came and began founding Bayer, one of the main founders of this. But the war crimes that he was particularly prosecuted for, you know, hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of deaths, they pinned on him, Mr. Fritz Tamir, right, the man who founded Bayer. Who, by the way, they to this day, every year, they put a wreath on Fritz Tamir's grave. Understand, these freaks that run Bayer have never apologized for this. Ellie, the only time that came up, Elie Wiesel, of course, who wrote Night, who was at Auschwitz, who lost his entire family in the death camps. Elie Wiesel writes this book. He happens to be at a seminar, a speech of some sort, and they make this passing, almost this non-apology to Elie Wiesel. But they've never apologized to the public. The U.S. government under Truman took all of these scientists and let them go. Yeah. By 1952, everybody that was involved in creating Zyklon gas, everybody that was involved in the death camps with IG Farben, all of these people were back in the norm. I thought it was interesting. I saw a quote, and it said that Hitler would not have had the success that he had without the cooperation of IG Farben. They actually, during the hearings, they actually determined that if you wage and you weigh what everybody actually did in the Second World War, they said that IG Farben actually drove the motor for the Second World War. Right. None of this could have happened, is what the Nuremberg trials determined, without IG Farben, which went on to become Bayer. But they also, they weren't just operating at Auschwitz. They had their own laboratory there. They made a deal with the Nazi government. We're going to give you this Zyklon B chemical to go kill people, and in exchange, we're going to pay you a small sum of money. You feed us regularly slave labor. So,
83,000.
Right. So they're at Auschwitz. They built this IG Farben laboratory. There's documents that show that they're bragging our relationship with the SS is hugely beneficial. Eventually, all their slave labor would die, so they would talk to them, and the documents also show this. Okay, we have to give you another payment. Please send us a fresh shipment of body.
They basically killed them off through experimentation. Mengele, of course, was trying to create the Aryan race. He wanted to figure out how to make everybody's eyes blue, how to make everybody blonde-haired. So he's performing these experiments on the population, primarily Jewish population. But look, it goes well beyond factor 8. It goes well beyond, look, I handled the case against him for Yaz. Tell the story. It was one that I worked up to trial. They had to settle the trial because I had found all of this information about their background, and they were bragging. They wanted to go to the jury and brag about what a wonderful company they are because they sell aspirin. And so on the eve of trial, they settled the entire Yaz project. But it was only because we were able to dig up the history. They were going all over the world bragging about what a wonderful company they were. Land this for me. Why is this important today?
This is important today. I think the main reason because the other corporate media won't tell this story. In fact, they downright refused to tell it when we pitched it to them with the documents, going from outlet to outlet, saying, here it is, you need to tell your people this. And that's why this is important to be able to tell this today, because people are dying from Bayer's actions.
And this is the only kind of place you hear these stories.
Exactly.
Farron, thanks you for joining me. Again, these stories every week, we try to cover stories that nobody else is talking about. This is one of them.